lonely. Have you felt like you don't belong? I'm more than familiar with the feeling after having lived abroad for so many years. But so are 70% of youth aged 13 to 17 who reported feeling lonely often, as stated by mentalhealth.org. From birth to 5th grade, I've been constantly changing schools, moving countries, resulting in me feeling lost, confused. I felt as though I had lost my identity. But I could not stay in this perpetual state of isolation, fear, overwhelmingness, and panic. So I found friends, found hobbies. I found a place of belonging. Loneliness is scary. It can even be damaging, but it is not impossible to overcome. To begin with, what is loneliness? Loneliness is a state in which someone longs and yearns for human connection, but feels alone. To emphasize, this does not mean you cannot feel lonely while in the company of others. For example, you're in a new school, in a new classroom. You're surrounded by people your age, and yet everyone around you is a stranger. You are completely and utterly alone. I chose this painting to depict the loneliness it feels in a crowd, how everyone is a stranger. You're supposed to feel connected. You're surrounded by people, and yet you are completely and utterly alone. Now that the definition of loneliness has been established, what are its causes? Loneliness is very subjective, hence it is very difficult to measure. However, a common cause is an inability to socialize outside of school settings. This was especially prevalent during the pandemic when people were forced to isolate and were disconnected from others physically. This caused retaining emotional connections and relationships incredibly difficult, as physical connection is one of the primary ways we humans retain emotional bonds. People reported feeling more lonely despite spending more time on social media. This is not to say social media has an inherently negative effect on socialization. However, it can contribute to loneliness due to negative feedback and social ostracization. Another common cause is moving places. It demands rapid change, causes physical isolation, and confusion in identity. Exactly what happened to me. I was 9 years old when I moved back to Lithuania. I was taken away from everything that was familiar, everything that I knew, and forced into a new place, a new culture. I was truly and utterly alone. I felt as though I had lost my identity. Loneliness causes many symptoms, from mental to even physical, depending on the situation. It has often been linked to anxiety, depression, even neuroticism. In a study conducted, people who didn't report feeling lonely were less anxious, less angry, had a better demeanor, improved social skills, and overall seemed happier. On the other hand, people who reported feeling lonely were angrier, shyer, more anxious, had poorer social skills, and generally worse demeanor. As I mentioned, loneliness can have very real physical symptoms, some of which being sleep deprivation, and difficulty sleeping, hormonal issues, and even a weaker immune system. It has even been linked to higher levels of heart disease and stroke. I've spoken largely about identity, about loneliness, what it is, where it comes from, what are its causes, but how does it relate back to identity? Loneliness in the period of transition is not uncommon. It demands rapid change, it removes us from what is familiar, and we desire closeness, comfort, something to help us explain how we live. If I were to ask you, who are you? You'd most likely reply with your name, what you do, where, and with whom. For example, I would answer this as, hi, my name is Marta. I'm a student at VIS. And from this you know who I am, what I do, where, and with whom. But when the answer to this phrase comes into question, loneliness can occur. Our surroundings are a vital part of our identity. They create the outermost shell of who we are. And when this comes into question, when our way of life comes into question, loneliness can occur. I was born in Lithuania in 2008, but shortly thereafter I moved to Sweden with my family, where I spent my years in an international kindergarten, learning English and, well, quite frankly, doing nothing. Afterwards, I moved to Poland, where I had to once again assimilate into a new culture, learn a foreign language, and make friends. Once again, I moved, this time to Switzerland, where I had to once again learn a new language, assimilate into a new culture. But this time it was different. I was able to build my identity. I found a group of people that I could connect with, and it was truly a time where I felt at home. And I'm sure you're noticing a pattern here. For the final time, I moved back to Lithuania. I moved back home. But was it really home? I had to return to a place that I was supposed to be familiar with, but I wasn't. I was alone, I was afraid, and I had no idea what I was supposed to do. Our surroundings are highly tied to our identity, and when our way of life comes into question, loneliness can occur. Loneliness is scary, can even be damaging, but it is not impossible to overcome. I'd like to focus on 3 aspects: acceptance, interests, and community. To begin with, being able to identify and accept loneliness when you feel it is crucial for being able to combat it and overcome it. Had I been given this piece of advice when I first moved here, I would not have been so afraid, so overwhelmed by the emotion, so confused by what I was feeling. I would have had some semblance of what I was supposed to do and how to do it. Secondly, finding your interests, exploring them. When I first moved here, I delved into art and sports, and I found out what I liked, and probably more importantly, what I didn't. And from this, I was able to find friends, find a community. I found a place in which I could truly feel like I belonged. And this brings me to my last point, community. Finding a community in which you can feel accepted in, feel belonged in, it really helps you become yourself. Find a sense of self-worth. Find your identity, rebuild it, and become yourself. In my case, joining the performance program was one of the best decisions I ever made. I found a community in which I could be myself, develop skills, feel more myself, and will make some of the best memories of my life. Loneliness is scary. It's damaging, can even physically hurt us, but it is not impossible to overcome. I've lived abroad for most of my life, and I have been unable to identify myself to anywhere. I could not find a home. But through the help of friends, community, social events, and putting myself out there, finding my place of belonging and rebuilding my identity. Loneliness is a part of life, but it should not be your life. I urge you, find your place of belonging and help others do the same. Thank you.